So we're getting to John the Baptist and the coming of John the Baptist and a few other matters that we left hanging last time. So I just wanted to read you once again this description of the coming of John the Baptist in Josephus. You don't have this book because it's too expensive, but if you get these collected works of Josephus like I have, and this is a collected works and this is a collected works, you can get them in a lot of church stores. A rip-off from a 16th century translation. They don't pay any royalties that way. The guy's been dead 400 years. So, that's a joke. What?
I just wanted to ask you, how come we don't, a lot of times during this class, you always went into the Maccabees. You don't do that anymore?
No, that's a different class.
Okay.
That's his school.
Oh, man.
What was this, a concert beginning? We're at the LA Philharmonic? Anyway, yeah, you just sit still over there. What are you moving? So, chapter 8, book 18, chapter 14, is Josephus. If you don't have this book, as I was saying, because the war is less expensive, but if you really want to study this period, and want to really be someone knowledgeable, make the investment. I mean, look, you got your whole life ahead of you. You got a lot of time when you're bored with your wife or your husband and fed up with your children or whatever else you're going to do in life, on a vacation or, you know, even if you stay single or have other kinds of alternate relationships, you're bound to have some downtime that you want to spend it aside from, you know, reading, you know, the latest idiotic magazine. And Josephus is always a good substitute for that. And plus you learn something. So the Antiquities is worth having. And you don't have to read the whole Antiquities. I've told you the Antiquities is so-called 20 books. It's really, I would say, 20 chapters divided up into sections. But they have it as 20 books divided up into chapters. But, you know, the Antiquities, you don't really have to start till around book 16. You've only really got to look at the last 4 or 5 books. And those are the books that parallel the Jewish war, but go into more detail. And this is if they're two continuous accounts, they're overlapping accounts. The other books retell the Bible and other things of that kind in Josephus' own inimical manner for his Greco-Roman audience. Okay, so you can read it, or there's be a bit of information here and there that will be interesting. I have to be honest, I've never read the whole of the Antiquities through, so even I, who emphasize getting it, you know, am a laggard in that regard. It's just too vast to read all of that all the way through. But from chapter 16 onwards, you can be sure I've read it, and or book 16 onwards. So I do recommend it. Okay, so about this time, it was that Philip, Herod's brother. And you see there's two individuals here. There's a Philip and a Herod. But he's not Herod like all the Herods. He's Herod. He's one of the Herodians called Herod, and that's what a lot of people don't realize. Departed this life in the 20th year of the reign of Tiberius, after he had been tetrarch of Trachonitis and Gaulonitis. Trachonitis and Gaulonitis are, I don't have to draw my map again, I hope. The Golan Heights, familiar in all the war in the Middle East where the Golan Heights are, above the Sea of Galilee on the Syrian side towards Damascus. And of the nation of the Batanaeans for 37 years. Well, that's all the same area. It's also in the back of my James book. I have a good map of that. He had shown himself a person of moderation and quietness in the conduct of his life and a government. He constantly lived in the country which was subjected to him. He used to make his progress, blah, 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 blah. He ordered the guilty that were convicted to be punished and absolved those who had been accused unjustly. He died. He knows a lot about him. His principality, Tiberius, for he left no sons behind him. See, this Philip left no sons and added to the province of Syria, but gave order that the tributes which arose from it should be collected and laid up, and so on and so forth. About this time, Aretas, the king of Arabia Petra, and Herod, Arabia Petra is over, again, more south of this, down by the Red Sea, and a little bit maybe further up. And Herod had a quarrel on account that Herod the Tetrarch, now this is a different person, this is Herod Antipas, had married the daughter of Aretas and had lived with her a great while. But when he was in Rome, he lodged with Herod, that is the other brother. It's very confusing. That's why the New Testament gets confused. That other brother, whose brother indeed, but not by the same mother, for this Herod was the son of the high priest Simon's daughter. High priest Simon's daughter is I know it's confusing, you have to read this yourself sometime, is the Bethusian high priest that I mentioned, the second Mariam who married Herod from Egypt. So this is a Bethusian. Anyway, he married her, who was the brother indeed. Anyway, he was the son of that mother. Herod had 10 wives, so it's sort of like a Saudi Arabian monarch. For this Herod was the son of the high priest Simon's daughter. However, he fell in love with Herodias, this last Herod's wife. Oh my God. Who was the daughter of Aristobulus, their brother, and the sister of Agrippa the Great. This man ventured to talk to her about a marriage between them, which she admitted an agreement was made to her to change her habitation and come to him as soon as he should return from Rome. One article of the marriage also was that he should divorce Aretas' daughter. So this guy, if I can get it straight, Philip is already dead. And Philip died childless. He had no children, at least no male children, according to this. Accordingly, Herod sent her thither, as thinking his wife had not perceived anything. Now she had spent a good while. This is the detail you get in Josephus. This is fantastic detail. I mean, let's be honest. It may not be perfect, but compared to the gospel detail, you have to admit it's infinitely vaster. And it's hard even to understand it, so it's so dense. And so, let's see, he sent the good woman, I can't even follow this, without informing her. Accordingly, Herod sent her thither, as thinking his wife had not perceived anything. Now she sent she sent a good while, before to Machaerus. This is this fortress where John the Baptist is ultimately going to be killed, on the other side of the Dead Sea in Jordan. I have a picture of that in my books, which was subject to her father. And so all things were necessary for her journey, because Aretas, the Arab king, had control of those areas, I think, were made ready for her by the general of Aretas' army, and by that means she soon came to Arabia and went home to her father, under the conduct of several generals who carried her from one to another successfully. And she soon came to her father and told him of Herod's intentions. So Aretas made this the occasion of enmity between him and Herod, who had also some quarrel with him about the limits of the country and Gamalitis, wherever they are. Anyway, so both prepared for war and sent their generals to fight instead of themselves. And when they had joined the battle, all Herod's army was destroyed by the treachery of some fugitives, who, though they were of the tetrarchy of Philip, joined with Aretas' army. So Philip's guys liked the Arab army side. So Herod wrote about these affairs to Tiberius. He's the emperor, who being very happy. So this is in the late 30s, after Jesus is come and gone, it would seem, if we can date Jesus in this context at all. Because Tiberius doesn't come into power, so this is, you see, Josephus is going to place John the Baptist in the late 30s. It's very, you say, well, that doesn't agree with the Gospels. You know, something's got to give. You'll have to decide which has to give. I hope I'm not boring you. Can I read the rest of this? Do you mind? I know it's hard to understand, but anyway, this is the late 30s. Mid to late 30s. Because Tiberius doesn't come into power until about 37 AD. No, pardon me, I'm wrong. That's the other one comes into power in 37. I think Tiberius dies in 37, so it's before 37. I apologize. We don't know exactly when it is yet. It isn't made clear that it's the late 30s, because Tiberius is still alive, so he dies in 37, so it's somewhere before the late 30s. Okay, so we may not have a problem dating here. It's so confusing to me that I'm confused reading it. So Herod wrote about these affairs to Tiberius, who, being very angry at the attempt made by Aretas, wrote to the governor of Syria, Vitellius, to make war upon him, and either to take him alive and bring him to him in bonds, or to kill him and send him his head. There's the thing about his head, sending him his head. But it isn't John the Baptist's head. I think that's where the New Testament gets the head of John the Baptist on a platter theme from. It's the head of Aretas that they want. The foreign general who's opposing the Roman armies. Am I making any sense? I hope so. I hope they'll get clearer. This was the charge Tiberius gave the governor of Syria. Now, some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that very justly as a punishment for what he had done against John, who was called the Baptist. For Herod slew him, even though he was a good man, and commanded the Jews to exercise righteousness, to exercise virtue, both as righteousness towards one another. What's righteousness towards one another, as I've told you? Loving your fellow man. And piety towards God. What's piety towards God? Loving God, the two love commandments. So John taught the same two things that the New Testament says Jesus taught. And that Josephus says the Essenes taught. Piety towards God, the Essene commandments, all their purity regulations. Bathing and food and all that sort of thing. Righteousness towards your fellow man, how you treat your fellow man in a just manner, in a righteous manner. Summed up supposedly by the two love commandments. So there we are now. Here is actually a continuous then chain of using this piety righteousness ideology to describe these people's doctrines. I put them all in the same sort of transmission sort of. That's why development. That's why I would say that these are all basically Essene type individuals. People say, was John an Essene? Yeah, basically. How did he differ from Essenes? Well, you'd have to tell me how he differed from Essenes. I don't see there's any difference at all. And if Essenes are the doctrines that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, then he's basically the same ethos, almost exactly. Okay. And so to come to baptism. Okay, we have the baptism theme. That's in the New Testament. That's where we part company. Look at how Josephus puts the baptism theme. And so to come to baptism, for that the washing or immersion in water would be acceptable to God if they made use of it, not in order for the remission of sins. That's just the opposite of the New Testament. And John taught remission of sins in the wilderness. No, that's not what he taught, according to Josephus. It's just the opposite, that they did not make use of baptism for remission of sins, but for the purification of the body, rather. For the purification of the body, so that you could then get maybe remission of sins. In other words, baptism is an immersion to get rid of bodily uncleanness, which was what the Essenes were using for. This is a very precise definition, you see, way beyond what we get in other contexts. So I would say this is what a native Palestinian document would look like, even though Josephus is a wretched person. And still there's information, you put him into a courtroom, and even wretched people can give good testimony in a courtroom. So I think this is what, and the other documents sometimes are what overseas people might make of it. That is, it may not be with the same precision, and they may get some of the things, a little bit, how they would think it should be, but maybe not how it actually was. So it was not for remission of sins. It was for purification, which makes sense. What are you going into water for? To wash your body, but not out of sins, out of uncleanness. The sin part comes later. Now, and here's the sin part. Providing that the soul had thoroughly been purified beforehand by the practice of righteousness. It was or it comes earlier if you want, it was the practice of righteousness that purified your soul of sin. Baptism is only the last step, getting rid of the bodily impurities that you may have contracted. You say, well, what bodily impurities? Well, these people believed there were bodily impurities of various kinds, getting near dead people, sleeping with women, any sexual act, can I be more specific? Wet dreams, I don't care what sort of thing it may be. That was all led to your bodily impurity. Contact with other people who were had bodily impurities. They were very big on purity. Okay, so the soul had to be purified before him by the practice of righteousness. Well, to me, does that make sense to you? I mean, to me, that makes like total sense. So that's why this is a less flamboyant, less mercurial picture of John the Baptist. And to my mind, and I know you'll beat me up for this, and just because I think it, you don't have to think it. We've heard all the other pictures of John the Baptist. We've heard John the Baptist for 20 centuries. We've seen pictures of him in a Renaissance sculptor, all thin and everything, almost naked. We've seen his head on platters 100,000 times, and so on. And all these gruesome pictures. We've seen women dancing, the dance of the seven veils. We've seen all this lurid stuff. This is more down to earth, that's all I can tell you. You don't have to decide what the luridness should go or stay. As you can see, I'm not enthusiastic about lurid pictures. Now, when many others came, the crowds about him, for they were greatly moved on hearing his words, so he was not an unpopular leader. He didn't, I don't think, spit at the crowds and say, "You generation of vipers, who told you to flee the end that is coming," or something. He didn't tell the crowd, "You're just a bunch of rotters, and get the hell out of here." Pardon me for being crude about it. He's a very popular leader, as I assume Jesus was, which is why they were all killed. They were greatly moved by hearing his word. Herod, it's nothing to do with necessarily the marital practices of the Herodians here, though it's introduced by the problems in the Herodian family and so on of things like marrying your sister. And John may have harangued them on their marital practices. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he did. The Dead Sea Scrolls would have done that. But that may be an original element there in the New Testament presentation, but they've got that wrong, since Philip is involved in it, and Philip, I forget, I have to read it. When we read it, I'll show you what the problem is. In any case, now when others came and the crowds about him, they were greatly moved by hearing his words. Herod, though, feared the great influence John had over the people. John had great influence over the people. So did Jesus, if we can assume in some way his historical presence somewhere in this context. And that therefore they could put it, he would put it in his power, or they would put it in his power, an inclination to lead a rebellion. For they seemed ready to do anything he should recommend. Well, you couldn't be clearer than that. John is so popular among the people that should he say, "It's time to get rid of these losers here," they will do it. Well, that's just, that's absolutely, you see why I'm reading this to you? That's pivotal for trying to decide who these rulers are, or who these leaders are, and what the situation vis-a-vis the ruling classes. Therefore, he thought best, that is Herod, this is Herod Antipas now, Herod the Tetrarch, thought it best by putting him to death, a preventive execution, to prevent any future mischief he might cause, and therefore bring upon himself difficulties that sparing a man could bring him, that would make him repent of it when it should be too late. It's a little bit, this is a translation from Greek from the 1600s. But what he's saying there, he thinks it's best to put him to death now, lest by being a little more tolerating, he would later be sorry for it because John would then cause the people and the unrest to rebound against him. So better to put troublemakers to death early rather than late. No dance on a tabletop. No Herodias mentioned. No Salome, and when she is mentioned, she's the wife of Philip. Not Herodias is the wife of Philip. That is the big mistake the Gospel seemed to make, or else Josephus is making it. Salome is the wife of Philip, who died childless. So the whole thing about raising up seed unto your brother and all this sort of thing is all confused in the New Testament presentation. We'll get to it. Accordingly, he was sent a prisoner, because of Herod's suspicious nature, to Machaerus, the fortress I have before mentioned, and there put to death. Okay? Because he was a troublemaker and he might lead a revolt. And now the Jews had the opinion the destruction of his army, that is Herod's army, in the dispute with Aretas, was a punishment upon Herod and a mark of God's displeasure with him. So the Jews so much liked John that they thought that Herod's loss in battle to Aretas was a punishment because of what he had done to John. I don't know if I can give you this material. I think I already read that to you. This is a problem of trying to pick these things out of here. I already read you the genealogies about Philip and Salome. All right, well, we haven't gotten to that part, of course, in our New Testament where John is executed and so on, but we do get an introduction of John. So let's see if we can go back to our New Testament material here. Let's see. So where were we now? We were, let me read you just the one other thing here that I said I would read you. This is, again, I think the beginning of chapter 18. That was in the middle of book 18. This is the beginning. Here it is. Now, Cyrenius, a Roman senator, who had gone through all the magistrates, had passed through them till he had been consul, and other councils of his great dignity, then came to Syria with a few others, being sent by Caesar to judge that nation and take an account of their substance. This is chapter 1 of book 18 still. Coponius, a man of equestrian order, was sent together with him to have supreme power over the Jews. Moreover, Cyrenius came himself into Judea, which was now added to the province of Syria. This is because they took it away from Herod's family after Herod's death, because his offspring, Archelaus in particular, you may not know this person's name, he's in the genealogies in my book, but Archelaus was a son of Herod, I think by a Samaritan woman or something. You look at the genealogies. He succeeded from 4 BC to 7 AD for about 10 years. But he was not, there was constant unrest, and you read the war about that. I don't have time to read all of that to you. But in any case, he wasn't strong enough to keep the situation together. So it wasn't a general census over the whole of the Roman world. It doesn't seem to be. Cyrenius came himself into Judea, which is now added to Syria, and to take an account of their substance and to dispose of Archelaus' money. But the Jews, although at the beginning took the report of taxation badly, yet did they leave off opposition to it, when Joazar, the son of Boethus, the Boethus we were mentioning, the high priest, the one whose sister had married Herod, persuaded them to do this without opposing it. And then on the other side was Judas a Gaulonite, that's from Golan, a city whose name was Gamala, and we'll hear about Gamala in the war against Rome. If you read further, Josephus is supposed to defend it, when all its inhabitants commit suicide when the Romans finally take it, who together with someone called Sadduq, a Pharisee, and he's clearly not a Pharisee because he's not accommodating. It's I think we should have to read there Pharisee can also be a splitter away from, to split from. That's what the Hebrew root is. So I think here we have to see this use of Pharisee here, because Zadok is the hero of the Dead Sea Scrolls language, and I think we're talking about a Dead Sea Scroll type priestly figure, and Josephus just uses that word to camouflage who he might be, because he's in no way Pharisaic. He was zealous to draw them to revolt. The Pharisees don't draw people to revolt, and the Pharisees are basically for the taxation. They believe in paying the taxation. That's properly presented in the New Testament when they ask Jesus, what about the taxation? And Jesus really doesn't answer. He says, oh, a taxation? I think there are several episodes about that, but one is he says, go Sea of Galilee, you'll find a fish. Take the fish out of the water, there'll be a coin in its mouth. So Jesus doesn't pay the temple tax or the taxation, the fish pays it for him. But in any case, he also says, look on whose picture is on the coin. And he says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and God's what is God's. Okay, that's been very famous in Western civilization, and we will come to it. But he also says, he who has ears, let him hear. In some people's ears, that could mean something quite different. The Zealot movement feels that God rules here, not Caesar. And therefore, everything is owing to God, nothing to Caesar. So render unto God's what is God's, and Caesar what is Caesar. Caesar gets nothing here, only God. So it depends on how you parse that. Sounds innocent on the outside, but it may have had a double meaning. I don't know if it did, and I don't even know if Jesus ever said it. But the point is, that's also the Pharisee general approach, that is, pay the secular authorities whatever is due them, and that's Paul's approach in Romans 13, and reserve for God whatever you think is due God. The Zealots push things a little further. In any case, this Sadduq and Judas, as we heard in the war, it was only Judas, started this Zealot movement. And they became zealous to draw the people to revolt and exhorted the nation to assert their liberty, as if this could produce happiness and security. So he goes on like that, how this brought upon us all the terrible ills and everything that happened to us, because the people heard them with pleasure, and all sorts of misfortunes sprang from these two men, and the nation was infected with this doctrine to an incredible extent. One violent war came upon us after another. There's a section in the New Testament when Jesus looks at the temple that all scholars, and we'll come to it, call the Little Apocalypse. Many of us think the Little Apocalypse is drawn, is drawn from this portion of the Antiquities, the speech. Jesus predicts wars and people turning against people and all the things to come, which is very parallel to this. Now, that doesn't mean that's true. That's for you to evaluate if it's true. But you can't evaluate if it's true if you don't know both presentations. That's why it's important to, since you don't have this book, I'm reading it to you. He blames this group then, the Zealots, for all the trouble that's going to come. Let's see. All sorts of fortunes sprang from these men. The nations were infected with this doctrine to an incredible degree. What's he basically saying here? This is the Zealot mentality, or I think it's basically the Messianic mentality. Revolutionary Messianism, maybe not pacifistic Messianism. Apocalyptic Messianism, militant Messianism, not Pax Romanum Messianism. Not turn the cheek Messianism, not love your enemy Messianism. So what we finally get in the end, and ultimately through Jesus' fall, is Pax Romanum Messianism, love your enemy Messianism. And I'm not sure how strong that ever was in Palestine. And as you see, it never did take over Palestine. It only took over the Roman Empire. As the way the Pax Romanum really wanted things to be. And it's now taken over the whole world, though the whole world is not, the whole Western world, is not really a very, very peaceful place, actually. I mean, no Western rulers, as we've said, have ever turned much cheek to anybody, nor have they loved their enemies to any great degree. Haven't seen any indications. So these, Constantine and his successors, though nominally Christian, use this doctrine in the breach when it's convenient, but their personal behavior rarely evidences it. I just watched a movie last night on the beginning of the First World War, where the Christian monarchs of Europe, you know, the drop of a hat, were willing to commit hundreds of thousands, millions of men to certain doom. The Russian emperor was related to the German Kaiser, was related to the British king, and so on and so forth. And they just was related to the Austro-Hungarian emperor. And they just poured men in all the Christian nations like they were water, like it was nothing. So, I mean, where is this return good for evil, love your enemy mentality? It didn't exist among the upper echelons of the society to any extent. You say, yeah, well, that's the weakness of it. Yes, but I think, you know, to a large extent, they did also use it to control the masses. Now, that's, of course, is the Marxian theory of religion is the opiate of the masses. I don't really think religion is the opiate of the masses, because I don't think this apocalyptic messianism is opiate. It's just the opposite. It's very aggressive militancy. So some approaches are to calm the masses. Some approaches are to work the masses up. Certainly, jihadism is not to calm the masses. It's to work. It may be an opiate, but it certainly isn't a calming opiate. It's a militant opiate. Okay, now. I don't want to judge. I give you this for you to decide where these things should fit or shouldn't fit, and I don't want to be the final arbiter. You decide for yourself. One violent war came upon us after another. We lost all our friends who used to help our pains. In other words, the Romans were our friends. Josephus is being extremely sycophantic here. There were also robberies, murders of principal men. This was done in pretense indeed for the public welfare, but in reality for the hopes of gain. In other words, all these extremists, assassins, they didn't have the good of the people. They just wanted to enrich themselves. I mean, this is a terrible accusation. Whence arose seditions, and from them murders of men, and which sometimes fell on their own people by the madness of these men. Who's foaming at the mouth here? He's trying to tell us about the origin of this movement after the tax issue, and what does it turn out? He's just fulminating against these people. He's so full of hatred of them. Because primarily they killed a very good friend of his, a man called Jesus ben Gamala, who was killed with another high priest. And I told you a little bit about that, throwing his body outside of the walls without burial for food for jackals. Josephus is very upset about these things. So these people murdered their own men, fell on their own people by the madness of these men towards one another, while their desire was that none of the adverse parties should be left alive. And sometimes on their enemies, a famine also came upon us. You see, the parallel with the little apocalypse is really strong. A lot of these elements are in the little apocalypse that Jesus pronounces in the Synoptic Gospels when he sees the city of Jerusalem for the last time, I think. Reducing us to the last degree of despair, as did also the taking and demolishing of cities. Nay, the sedition at last increased so high that the very temple of God was burned down by the enemy's fire. See, again, we are at fault. We have nothing, only ourselves to blame. But you see, he does admit the Romans burned the temple. Another point in the Jewish war, he kind of said that the Jews burned their own temple. He didn't want to blame the Romans for it. The temple was burned down by their enemies' flames. Such was the consequence of this, and such a change was made that the customs of our fathers were altered, and such a change was made, and the alteration of the customs is refusal to accept gifts and sacrifices on behalf of foreigners, and also finally on behalf of the Roman Emperor, which is he mentions that repeatedly in the 50s, 60s period. And such a change was made as added a mighty weight towards bringing all to destruction, which these men occasioned by their conspiring together. For Judas and Sadduc, who excited a fourth philosophic sect among us, and had many great followers therein, filled our civil government with tumults at present, and laid the foundation of our future miseries by this system of philosophy with which we were before unacquainted with, concerning which I shall discourse a little, and this rather because he calls it a disease. At one point in Acts, Paul was asked, are you one of these disease carriers infecting the whole Mediterranean? And Paul said, oh, no, that's me. Basically asking him if he's one of the messianic agitators. He denies that. a disease which spread thence among the younger sort who were zealous for it and brought our public to destruction. The Jews had for a great while 3 sects of philosophy, and then he goes on to describe the 3 sects of philosophy, but since he's already spent so much time on the zealots, he reduces the essay into a paragraph. Whereas you remember in the Jewish war, he had pages and pages on the essays. But notice, that is the time of the census. That's what launches him into this whole thing. And where does the New Testament, at least according to Luke, begin the birth of Christ? The census. I don't know what to say. It may just be coincidence. It may have more significance to it than that. Now, there's just one other thing I would like to, I don't even know if I brought it because I don't see it in my bag of tricks here. I don't know what happened. I didn't lose it somewhere. Looks to me like I've misplaced it somewhere, which would be a great disaster for me. Let me read you here Josephus' account of the death of Herod. Okay. In chapter 7, he says, the territory of Archelaus was brought under direct Roman rule. This is the war. And a man of equestrian rank in Rome, Companius, was sent out as procurator with authority from Caesar to inflict the death penalty. In this time, a Galilean named Judas tried to stir the natives to revolt, saying they would be cowards if they submitted to paying taxes to Rome, and after serving God alone, you see only God rules here, accepted human masters. And he was a rabbi with a sect of his own, quite unlike any of the others. But he doesn't say anything more about it than that, and has already just described the sects. So that's in 7, but if we go back here to 4 BC, in the time of the death of Herod, let's see. In the midst of these troubles, 4 BC now, Herod was ill and old, and he thought he was dying, but he didn't die, and he got back, he survived, sort of like Saddam Hussein. In the midst of these troubles, there occurred a popular uprising. You see, all we do is get uprising after uprising after uprising. That's what's missing in the Gospels, the background of unrest. Political and civil unrest, total chaos. This is 4 BC all the way to 70 AD we've been describing here. Where is Jesus going to fit into all this? Yes, the Prince of Peace would fit in great there, if we could put him in there someplace and insert it as a popular leader. As a popular leader, which I think he wants. Anyway, at this time there were 2, he doesn't call them rabbis, he calls them sophists. Sophist is a Greek philosophical term for people who can make good rhetorical speeches, but my text translates that as rabbis. There were 2 rabbis in the city, 2 teachers, 2 sophists, with a great reputation as exponents of national tradition. What would an exponent of national tradition be? That would be someone who knew the law. The law would be the national custom, the national tradition. One was called Judas, the son of Sephareus. They all have Maccabean names. The other was called Mattathias, son of Margallus. So we have Judas, Matthias, no, not Mattathias, Matthias. Well, these are names also that are used among Jesus' apostles too. Judas, Matthias. Matthias is the one who takes the place of the other Judas in the election in Acts. Interestingly enough, Judas, the son of Sephareus. Sephora is a town, the biggest town in Galilee. I'm not sure if that was really his father or that was where he came from. He looks suspiciously like Judas the Galilean. How many Judas's revolutionaries were there? Except it's around 4 BC instead of 7 AD. Anyway, many young students came to them for instruction in the law. That's like Jesus is portrayed as. In fact, daily they attracted a host of men in their prime. Just like Jesus, right? When they learned that the king, Herod, was succumbing to sickness of body and mind, they dropped a suggestion to their acquaintance that this would be a wonderful chance to strike a blow for God. And Herod had erected a Roman eagle above the entrance to the temple in honor of the Romans. And of course these zealots like Bin Laden or others, wouldn't like that being there. So here Herod was dying or getting weak and almost dying. It would be a wonderful chance to strike a blow for God. pulled down the works that Herod had erected contrary to the laws of their fathers, contrary to the holy law. Although it was unlawful to have in the temple images or portrait busts or the likeness of living things, the king had put over the great gate a golden eagle. This the rabbis now urged their listeners to cut down, saying that even if there was danger, it was a glorious thing to die for the laws of their fathers. You're mentioning the Maccabee books. That's a theme of the Maccabee books, that it's making a noble death. The first encouragement to martyrdom is the preferable thing, and that will earn you eternal glory. I think the Muslims have taken their idea of holy war and jihad from these early indications. For those who came to such an end, here it is, there was a sure hope of immortality. There it is. It's the whole Muslim law of jihad. And so don't tell them. They'll get angry if you tell them. This is about 7 centuries before them, probably 8. You know, people who don't give footnotes, I'm really angry. I always get angry when people don't put footnotes in their works. A lot of people think that something is their own. I have people spit back my ideas to me all the time. And they say, did you know Professor Eisenman, blah, 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 blah. And I've said this like about 500 times, you know. And they think they've discovered something new, which is fine. Everyone can discover something new. But in the case I'm thinking, it was often because they forgot that they read it in my book. You know, so, but in any case, in the Muslim situation, let's be honest, these ideas were already, you know, floating around in a very widespread manner in the Palestinian milieu about 7 or 8 centuries before. I'm not saying they're good or bad, but it would be nice to get a little bit of a footnote occasionally, rather than just anger and hostility. You know, that would be a more generous approach to relationships. Anyway, that's up to them, and you know, people are the way they are, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Although it was unlawful to have okay, we did this, it was a glorious thing to die for the laws of their fathers. For those who came to such an end, there was a sure hope of immortality and the eternal enjoyment of blessings. Whereas the mean-spirited people, whose souls were unromantic, knowing nothing of rabbinical wisdom. I'm not sure if the original Greek is rabbinical wisdom. That's why it's good to look at the Greek in an instance like that. I don't have it with me. Through ignorance, clung to life and chose death by disease rather than death in the cause of righteousness. So death in the cause of righteousness, what we would call martyrdom, is going to bring you eternal reward. That's what these rabbis were teaching in 4 BC. While they were preaching this, it was rumored the king was actually dying, so the young men undertook the task with more confidence. At midday, when masses of people were walking about the temple courts, they lowered themselves by stout ropes from the roof and began to cut down the golden eagle with axes. The news quickly, does this sound authentic to you? Yeah, to me it does. You know, no reason to question the general gist of it. You know, maybe some aspect of it you might want to question, but it sounds pretty reliable. The news quickly reached the king's officer, who hurried to the spot with a large force, seized about 40 young men, and took them before the king. He asked them whether they dared to cut down the golden eagle. They said they had. Again, this is an interview then before the ruler. We have scenes like this in the Gospels. Who told them to do it? Jesus is silent. They say, the law of our ancestors, the holy law, the Mosaic law. What made them so cheerful when they were about to be executed? Cheerfulness in the face of death was the same as he presents Essenes. Remember, he said they when they were tortured and racked because they wouldn't eat food sacrificed to idols, they just laughed. The knowledge that they would enjoy greater blessings after death. At this, the king exploded with rage, and forgetting his sickness, went out to address the public meeting. He attacked the men at great length as temple robbers who, pleading the laws in excuse, had some ulterior motives and demanded they give the punishment for sacrilege be applied to them. The people, fearing punitive measures in a wide front, begged him to punish first those who suggested the attempt, then those who had been caught in the act, and take no action against the rest. The king reluctantly agreed. Those who had lowered from the roof, together with the rabbis, he burned alive. I guess that's sort of a preview of Joan of Arc here. The rest of the men seized, he handed over to his attendants for execution. And then it goes on how he dies here. he's got painful spasms and all kinds of things like that, and diseases, and they said it was punishment for what he did to the rabbis, and he went to the, oh God, fired for
So,
I didn't get into the introduction I wanted to get to. I apologize. Huh? Oh, well, we're done. Done for the day. I seem cursed in this class to not